All right, we've made it back from lunch and solved some technical issues. So welcome back. If you're with us online, thank you for joining. The poll was interesting. Most people think that you can make a financial return while impact investing, doing direct impact investing. And in terms of percentages of funds that consider biodiversity risks and opportunities in their investment decisions, it sort of sits at less than half for half respondents and less than a quarter for the rest, although there's a few respondents where it's at about 3/4. And that leads us on nicely to our next speaker, and that is Anna van Paddenburgh. I probably mispronounced that last name. And she is a green growth professional. And basically what that means, in my understanding, is that she has helped incept, run and pull through many different sort of nature-based projects. And she has 2 decades of experience in integrating the value of nature in the economic and investment decisions, and then delivering cutting edge projects based off of that knowledge. So, Anna, thank you for being here. Just make sure we get you on the screen. How do I do that? 1 second. Now we can see you. Thanks for being here, Anna, and we'll look forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Great. Thank you, Sebastian, for the introduction. Glad to be here, and thanks for the invitation to share my thinking and my experience around the topic of biodiversity loss, and particularly around the fact that this is actually a twin crisis, climate and biodiversity. Kia ora tātou, ko ana toku ingoa. And I'm going to have to leave it at that in terms of my te reo. But I am very glad to be here. I live in Auckland. I am of Dutch Indonesian origin, born in Papua New Guinea, actually, and most of my formative years have been in that area, Pacific Island, Eastern Indonesia, which has also shaped my way of looking at life. And it's very similar to the Te Ao Maori worldview. Everything is interconnected, and you'll see that through the thread of this presentation around biodiversity loss, because it's all about interconnectivity. And I wanted to end and make sure that you've got that mindset as well as you look into biodiversity loss and how this is part of that crisis that we're facing today. Good. So the outline of my presentation is just a brief description around what we see biodiversity is, the link between climate change and biodiversity, the risks we're facing related to the loss of nature, and the opportunities behind this. So what are the investable assets and instruments out there that can help shape a nature positive economy? First of all, what is biodiversity? Most of you will look at biodiversity from this lens, the fluffy species, the protected areas, all very beautiful, but separate from us, away from us. It's a good thing to do if we protect these species. But I want to take you to another journey, which is really about our dependency on nature. And innately, I think we all know about this. It's just in practice, we seem to be hampered in getting this on board into our financial decision-making and economic decision-making. But look at the images I have here on the screen, the worms important for soil fertility, the centipedes, the arthropods, the insects important in playing a role in ecosystems, providing ecosystem services for humanity and our economic sectors. The phytoplankton there in the middle image, did you know that phytoplankton in the oceans actually provide 50% of the oxygen we breathe? Now that shows dependency. The coastal systems, the forest and the deadwood you see down below there, and the inland wetlands and peatlands outside protected areas are also playing a critical role to the life we live today. Now, I wanted to bring in a picture of my two kids and their cousins in there, just to highlight that human species are part of biological diversity. And once we see that, once we recognize that we are part of biological diversity, part of nature, that's when we can more easily connect to it and recognize the dependency that we have around nature. And it's not only just these species on its own, the presence of these species on its own, it's their interaction with the abiotic environment, which you see here on the right of that previous slide. I've moved on to the next slide, but nonetheless, it's the interaction between the biotic organisms and the abiotic environment in the waterways, in the seas, and in the land and in the forests. So that interaction between species and with the abiotic environment is what this biodiversity is really about, because together they are an interdependent web of life and dependent on their mutual survivals. They are all in different trophic levels, and this is how you have the different food chains in our ecosystems, forming different food webs in the soils and also in the waterways. They all play a critical role in shaping our terrestrial ecosystems, our marine ecosystems, our freshwater ecosystems, which are the areas where we get our ecosystem services from. And these ecosystem services is what we use day in, day out in our businesses, in our households, to build our economies. And we are, as financial sector, we are financing. We have a big influence as to where we're directing our financing towards. And this is the same context as our discussion around climate. We want to make sure we finance the low carbon economy. Also, we want to make sure we finance the investment portfolios which don't destruct our environment, which actually enhance biodiversity and make sure that these ecosystem services remain functioning. Now, as I wanted to highlight that this is a twin crisis, the one we know already is the climate change crisis. And it's great to see that this has been on top of the global agenda for probably the last 10, 15 years or so. But it doesn't mean it only started then. The issue was about 100 years ago, or even before that, the fact that we are actually increasing emissions by the way that we run our businesses. And that's an important crisis we need to tackle, because we need to be within that 1.5 degrees increase, if possible, well below 2 degrees, because we have certain climatic conditions. It's urgent because we have certain climatic conditions for our human species to actually be able to live. Now, similarly, nature has this ecological condition as well, or we need certain ecological condition to be able to actually live within this planet. So we need to look after our nature in that sense. Now, if you look at the diagram here in the middle, where we see the anthropogenic cycle and the natural cycle interacting, through many of our production, many of our sectors, we are dependent on nature. We use it as raw materials, we use it as ecosystem services, water. We use all kinds of natural capital into our economic system. That the way that we do that, we don't know. We don't know what our investments, how they are actually, how are they running their businesses on the ground. But we already have data that this is polluting. This is, well, actually the dependency side, it's depleting because it doesn't allow regeneration at this end. And that's an important one to remember, regeneration. As we take it out of the system, do we give it enough time to regenerate? Now, on the other hand, on the impact hand, we also damage the ecosystem again, because we discard, we pollute, we don't look after, we don't have a circular system. Circularity is another important element within our economy. We don't look after that, then we keep on dumping everything on the ground, dumping everything in the sea, and we damage these biodiversities in the soil, in the waterways, and that has negative implications and disrupts our ecosystem services, which disrupts our economy because we deplete the resources and the functions of the system that goes back into the economy. So we are damaging the economy, and that macroeconomic deterioration is what I'm trying to highlight here. With that macroeconomic deterioration leads also to financial risks, exposures to banks, financial institutions, and cooperations on the planet in all the countries. So this is an important element an important thing to try and understand, that it is not just these emissions. It's critical to decarbonize. I just want to underscore that. And also it's critical to look after a healthy ecosystem, a healthy environment, by knowing what are we investing into? Are they regenerating? Are they circular? Are they producing an economy which is nature positive overall, climate positive, nature positive? Now, this decrease in biodiversity has led us to a lot of other issues, because it escalates from one to the other. All of these different cycles that are ecological cycles that are operating get impacted, because all of these living organisms interacting with the abiotic environment, they all play a role in making sure that our ecosystem functions properly. On top of that, biodiversity loss and climate change are also mutually reinforcing each other. So with a slight increase in temperature and climate change, it can further exacerbate the loss of biodiversity, which is critical to produce and to continue these ecosystem services. And with the loss of biodiversity, we exacerbate climate change, because we need resilience. Biodiversity helps in building resilience into our ecosystem, so we can better withstand climate shocks and many other external shocks. So this is really an urgency, as I see it, and as some other in the field of sustainable finance who do want biodiversity in the bigger picture, of a bigger scheme of things around linked up to climate. And it's great to see that the World Economic Forum has actually recognized this in 2020. Actually, this data is from 2021, but they started to bring in biodiversity loss as a major global risk to the macroeconomy since 2020. Now, this is good development to see that there is that global attention, and there are some countries that are taking this further forward faster than others. The drivers of biodiversity loss are very common to New Zealand also: habitat loss, invasive species, overexploitation, pollution, climate change, all very relevant to the New Zealand context as well. Now, it's clear that climate change and biodiversity loss are the greatest market failure of the century, of the last century, particularly, and continues to be so. We've not internalized these in our economy, in our financial system, in our decision making. We've not looked at this as critical elements to look into as we start to invest. And that's a great market failure. And I hope we can change this in our lifetime, because we don't want to see this happening for our children, grandchildren, and the future generations. More than half of the world's economy is actually dependent on nature. There's a lot of data and information coming through. At the end of this slide deck, I've shared some of the important literature for your bedtime reading. But I'm more interested in focusing this to the New Zealand context and how this relates and how to make it relevant to a country like New Zealand. Over the past 150 years or so ago, we see deforestation happening, monoculture plantation happening, expansive pasture lands. I hear 50% of New Zealand area is actually under pasture land of only 3 types of imported grasses, I believe. There are predators coming in. Now, all of these different drivers have led to significant soil erosions, landslides, sedimentation, very concerning soil and water pollution, of which some rivers are not swimmable even, increased floods, droughts, heat waves. So all of these, what you see in these pictures, are very relevant to New Zealand and to the situation on the ground that actually leads to biodiversity loss, both from the dependency side, because we didn't look after it when we use it in the economy, and from the impact side, when we dump everything and when we just don't have proper waste management practices. and circular economies in the system. So all of these, I just want to also highlight biodiversity and health, biodiversity and culture. If we don't look after these will also have various implications if not addressed at the same time as all of these other issues. So many of this, if we don't look after this, we will actually become more fragile. Our ecosystem will become more fragile. We will have reduced resilience because of all of these negative implications on our nature, because of further reducing biodiversity. And when we lose this resilience, we are unable to deal with these external shocks like climate change, wildfires, and even infectious diseases. In many of these commodities, I've seen some infectious diseases coming. And if we are more resilient, if our ecosystem is more resilient, we'll be better able to address these. As I said, a lot more data have come up the last couple of years. This is an example from the Dutch financial institution analysis, which highlights that they are significantly exposed. 510 billion euros are exposed as being high dependent on nature. And you'll see that the banks, the pension funds, the insurers here are financing these different sectors through loans, shares, and bonds, and that these sectors use these types of services. Now, how do we know that these services continue to provide the services that they need to provide? Now, that's an important disclosure information and criteria to be bringing into the way we look at our investments. Interesting developments are happening the last 2 years. This is all in the last year, actually. In March, the French government mandated disclosure of investments and risks across both climate and biodiversity. So that's great development to see. In June, the TNFD, the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, is formalized. Now, this is a baby coming out of also the thinking behind the TCFD. So it's to develop that similar kind of global framework around nature-related risks. And the G20 recently also included biodiversity much more significantly in their sustainable finance roadmap. So all developments that are happening recently. Now I have 3 slides around physical risk, transition risk, and systemic risk. I won't have time to go through them all, but if you are interested, have a read of this after the session, or we can have a discussion on it separately. But it's just to highlight that there are some real material risks out there for financial institutions as well. An example here is if you're investing in one particular landscape and that landscape is deteriorating because of high river siltation, for example. The one example here in the Philippines that's led to intermittent operations of an hydroelectric dam. Now, I've seen that happening also in other countries, which has impacted river transportation and the balance sheets there. Now, all of these companies that use this system, and if you are a financier, a debt provider, loan provider in these contexts, then you want to reconsider what kind of risks are you being exposed to. In New Zealand, I hear about the Hokianga River sedimentation being a big issue, and even fish mutating right now because of the high level of sedimentation that they breathe in. Increased fires, fire risks with monoculture plantation, erosion. All of these are issues that we need to think through. How exposed is my portfolio in terms of these kinds of risks? Transition risk is an important one for financial institutions because often this links to reputation, to regulation changes, to shifts in markets. So I'll just touch on a few here. In terms of reputation, we face the risk of losing shareholders who become more and more interested in these kinds of being better for the planet, but you can't just be better for the planet for the sake of the climate. We have to look at it in a more holistic sense. So with reputation, there are global agricultural supply chains and textile garments and footwear industry. They are already seeing how connected their investments are to soil, water pollution, and degradation. Now, this is coming out. A lot of public attention is being faced by these industries. So they have to think, what are the risks associated to this in terms of their investment portfolios? In New Zealand, this comes to nitrogen leakage to aquifers and rivers by the agribusiness sector, seabed mining, bottom trawling, clear felling, and even carbon farming without looking at the biodiversity outcomes associated with this. That's another topic on its own, but all of this are important reputational risks we can consider. Similarly, the market shifts I highlighted there. Asset repricing can happen because of biodiversity criteria being included in investment strategies of big multinationals. Unilever has done this, Danone has done this, Patagonia has also moved in this direction. And there are many global organic food and beverages markets that are booming and that's reaching, big billion-dollar businesses in the future. So all of this is happening. So we don't want to be behind the cart. We want to be at the front. What is it going to be with our milk commodities? Will it lose its competitive edge in this global market if it's seen that it's actually resulting in significant risk areas related to biodiversity loss and ecosystem services loss? It's something worth considering and thinking through how exposed we are. Now, this is the severity. If we continue to experience these chronic changes, these chronic events of ecosystem deterioration, and combined with acute risks associated to, for example, drought in a certain summer. So that combination can lead us to systemic risk. Now, would Canterbury be heading in towards that direction with the significant ecological stresses and the financial stresses that these farmers are facing? What can we do to move that around, to change that around? There are some examples globally that are there. I'm just highlighting two here, one in the Aral Sea, which is a big lake that actually has shrunk completely, and the economy has been destroyed at that because of these changes, all from agri and fishery. Now the industry and market collapse is another important one to really think through, and COVID is a real live example of this. Because once the system changes, whatever the reason is, it really affects our supply chain. It affects multiple sectors, it affects entire regions. So how is that going to affect your financial portfolio? It's important to keep that in mind. On this, I wanted to end with a positive note as we move towards the investable assets. This is in China at the Loess Plateau. I used to live in that area, and I've seen that this from this kind of a landscape, it's gone to this kind of a landscape, a regenerative landscape. So it's possible to change this. It's possible to reverse this, but it's important to act as soon as possible. Now, there are many great examples, not only overseas. There are plenty in New Zealand already. I have spoken to some very innovative and exciting entrepreneurs, startups, and people working in this sector. I won't be able to go through all, but I just wanted to take a step back and look at these images from left to right as landscapes. You've got the forest landscapes up here, from the forest, biodiverse forest, predator-free forest, forests that provide for economy and for ecosystem services, and providing a multitude of different kinds of products, not just dependent on pine, but it can also be from other native timber sources as well, but also other type of products are coming out of forested landscapes. In the agricultural landscapes, we can do our agricultural businesses in a much more regenerative way through regenerative pasture lands, rotation and grazing, and we can build a variety of multiple value-add products. An interesting one, I've talked to a person from actually the founder and the entrepreneur of Wool Aid, who's using wool fiber to make this biodegradable Band-Aids, or to replace fossil fuel-based plastics Band-Aids. So these are very exciting opportunities that are already out there. Here, this is, I think, in Christchurch, a robotic entrepreneur that is looking at precision ag combined with AI and machine learning, and to see how it will actually reduce costs, but also have multiple value add and multiple benefits in terms of climate and biodiversity. In the ocean landscapes and in the coastal landscapes, we have systems where you can have salmon together with cod together with seaweed, all together playing a role in ecosystem service provision and the economy at the same time. Seaweed is actually a major global commodity these days, as it provides the opportunity of multiple products generation. And actually, this one is a UK-based Naturemetrics, UK-based startup, which is also very interesting, working on monitoring. So it's not just the products that we can generate, also the services that can come out of a nature-positive economy. Now, some are already generating returns on investments, and actually reasonable, up to even 12 to 15% IRR. And some, actually, the ones that are more about restoration of degraded landscapes, they're the more difficult ones. They're less mature and they need more upfront capital. I think the more we can provide upfront capital, the better that these systems can develop over time and turn into mainstream businesses. Now, these are all nature-based solutions. I also want to highlight some urban type of solutions. The UK rail network did a great, interesting innovation where alongside their rail track, they brought in biodiversity corridors. And this is in an effort to bring back the pollinators, which is a big issue in Europe and the UK because of the dependency of these pollinators with crop outputs. So it's a great innovation from them. In New Zealand, the Three Waters reform is also a big leap forward in this direction to support or to actually separate out wastewater and stormwater, and that will benefit biodiversity as well in the downstream sediment. As the sediments go into the rivers, it will have less of these contaminants. Urban farming, mentioned earlier this morning, it's going to be the future. There are many biomaterials coming out in the in innovative sectors, and this one is asphalt in the Netherlands. It's another one here from the Netherlands, which is from bathroom tiles from sewage sludge and algae. The packaging industry, there's some here in New Zealand actually already working on biomaterials. And in design of housing, we heard about housing construction this morning. It would be great to see that also horticulturalists are being involved, involved in the design of these types of investable assets. So there is a good amount of opportunities out there. Now, to be able to make them scale, we need to use instruments, and these are critical actually. Again, I won't have much time to go through this one, but I wanted to highlight that a variety of instruments are out there, very similar to what's going on in the climate space. Nothing new. It's just bringing in this criteria, this additional criteria around enhancing biodiversity or reversing the loss of biodiversity so our ecosystems can function. There are examples that I've worked with in Colombia. Some colleagues in TNC worked on the one in Mexico here on the coral reef as an insurance policy. David Hall is working in New Zealand. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's from the AUT and very much involved in the design of these kinds of financial instruments that can be deployed and used in New Zealand to help finance these investable assets. Now, I think most importantly is to capitalize on collaboration. There are a lot of interesting opportunities. The Agri Investment Vehicle working actually to raise equity at the moment for regenerative farming. Tane Tree Trust, the NZ Farm Forestry Association, Come the Farm, Whenua Oho working with iwis, all fantastic people working to actually move into this direction of regeneration. Agri-Sea as well, working on seaweed. The Predator-Free Hauraki Coromandel Community Trust, I'm involved in this trust as well. And don't think Predator-Free is somewhere out there away from this, but it's also part of building back biodiversity, supporting climate change, and supporting the socioeconomy of the area. Scion is working on biomaterials. Make sure that that's linked up with all of these other platforms that are out there. As we've heard, the sovereign bond, the sovereign green bond is coming. We have the green investment fund. If biodiversity criteria can be much more embedded within these facilities also, it will be much more feasible for these kinds of opportunities to actually make it to the market and scale it in the market. So yeah, important to work with the various investment platforms out there, the startups, bring the buyers and off-takers on board, use government platforms, all play a critical role in this. Now, just some important principles to remember that we do want to invest in high quality instruments and pipelines. So remember that, take it always a step back and see, is this making sense in terms of my landscape? Does this interconnect and does it provide these ecosystem services that I need? Climate, biodiversity, social equity are key goals. We want to invest in natural capital, human capital, systems change, and use some of these instruments as a means to an end to try and scale the carbon credits, the water credits, biodiversity credits. It can all help and is part of the solution. But don't see it as an alternative to decarbonization. That's still remaining a very critical thing to do. Now, these kinds of deals is really where we get to stronger financial stability. And I want to end with this particular image, which I love, from the University of Cambridge, I think. We want to build this nature positive economy. We want to stay in this green state space, boosting ecosystem services and creating that positive economy. If we stay in the middle here, we go in a vicious cycle where we continue to lose our nature, and we have risks, and we will have lost financial losses as well. So remember this. I hope you can keep this in mind, have a shift in mindset. The risks are indeed real, and it can become more severe if we don't act. Be more informed about your risk return profiles. Include these risks into climate disclosure and your current actions and strategies. It is a win-win. Integrate climate risks, nature-related risks, and social risks. Social equity is an important angle that I've not even touched, but I thought many others have touched on already. It's a decade of transition, so I hope you can be one of the pioneers in this area. Mauri ora, ngamihi.
Thank you, Anna. Very insightful presentation. We've got time for a couple of questions. So the first question from Henry, he asks, what role do you see in regenerative agriculture being able to capture and store carbon, particularly in the degraded soils in the world?
Particularly in the degraded soils of the world. Well, first of all, they do play a role. 100%. Regenerative farming, if it's done in a way that actually restores the soils holistically, it will have carbon storage possibilities. There are certain soils which store more carbon than others, and that's the danger. This is where we sometimes then think, okay, we just have to focus on maximizing that carbon, and that's when we go into the loophole. We have to be careful there. Different soils have different functions, and some store more carbon than the other. It doesn't mean we have to focus on just the ones that are going to store carbon. For the sake of climate change, let's reduce that gross emissions. And for the sake of our nature, carbon is part of this, and we have to look at the interconnectivity. So maybe that's my response, but yeah, they do play a key role in carbon storage.
Thank you. And one more question. It's a bit of a longer one from Cheryl Reynolds. An excellent presentation, Anna. Thank you. It's great to hear your key message about the interconnectivity between the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis. New Zealand has somewhere between 4,000 and 10,000 endangered species. The world has over 1 million endangered species. As a global community, we humans are aware of the climate crisis, but few of us are aware of the twin escalating biodiversity crisis. How can we change that? So how do we build more awareness of this issue alongside climate change?
Yeah. I hope I try to explain this a little clearer in the presentation, that it's not just about the presence of these species. If we look at global areas, and some severe numbers are being mentioned for some areas and less so for other areas, but it's about the interconnection between the species of the different trophic levels, between the species and our abiotic environment, the water, the soil. It's that interaction that creates the functions, the processes, and eventually these ecosystem services that we benefit from and that we actually depend on, not just benefit from. So it's that realization, I think. More importantly, then we have thousands of species that we need to save. Yes, we do need to save them. We do need to look after these species. But to me, the message is about this dependency to our ecosystems is because we need these ecosystem services and we're losing it because our biodiversity is lost, is depleting.
Great, thank you for that clarification. I might have to get you to come give a guest lecture on my course next year to make sure our future investment managers learn this. So thank you very much for your time, Anna.